With Mortenax Blade coming up just in a few weeks, I want to make a longer dedicated video just to him to help you, the viewers, decide if you should or should not end up preparing for him and use your probably hard-earned Jades on him. So we're going to be going over what makes Mortenax Blade really strong as a character and just some general info that you would want to know about him. After that, we're going to be going over reruns of characters that are seeming to be reran and also just future banner considerations from what we do know, which is a bit into the rumors category, so keep that in mind. Talking about his vertical investment itself, so mainly just S1, E1, and E2, because anything past that is more unrealistic. And at the very end, talking about if Mortenax Blade is worth it for you. Stuck grinding in Honkai Star Rail? Need Stellar Jades fast? We've got you covered. Head over to U7 Buy, your ultimate gaming hub for save, fast, and cheap in-game top-ups. Whether it's Star Rail or your other favorite games, U7 delivers instantly and players love it. Check out their Trustpilot reviews, they're actually top ranked. On the Honkai Star Rail direct top-up page, you can recharge your account in seconds. For example, 8080 Honorific shards cost $99.99 in the official store. However, on U7 Buy, you can see the price is cheaper. When you head over to U7 Buy, you might notice that the storefront display prices currently match the in-game store, but don't worry, the magic happens at checkout. Once you click the buy now button, your total instantly drops to our actual discounted price only. Just pick your server, enter UID, pay securely, and boom, your account is instantly loaded. Want extra savings? Use code PRETSR at checkout for 5% off, perfect for last minute pulls, battle passes, or surprising a friend. And here's a bonus. If you spend $80 a month on U7 Buy, you can grab the Honkai Star Rail Express Pass for only 1 cent, which is nearly free. Click on the link in my description, recharge fast, save more, and keep blazing those trails. So first, let's generally go over Mortenax Blade. What makes him the strong character that should be considered, and what should you know? I want to say, as we are going into stuff that isn't actually in-game, the only confirmed info, quote-unquote, is the fact that he is a fire character and on the path of nihility. Rest of this goes into the more unconfirmed changes, so there could be something that changes later on, so we are going to be going off that. So Mortenax Blade himself, I'm also mainly assuming that you, the viewer, mostly doesn't know what he does, but we're still going to be going into it because I kind of have to. He is actually a general all-around good character. He does good damage. He has great debuffs that are almost all universal, and he actually works on a multitude of teams. Easiest way to put it is think of Chibi being a slot in. Mortenax Blade can actually just do that as well. Both of them still have their differences where one can be better than the other, but the best way to think about it is kind of like Chibi, especially since he's modernized. His damage is going to be good for standards, but you still want to make sure he is getting buffed in some way, shape, or form. Just through his own without investment is not going to be that crazy. However, with buffs, he can definitely perform insanely well. The debuffs and buffs he provides is debuff wise being vulnerability and also defense shred. 50% vulnerability, 30% defense shred. His buffs is able to increase the team's damage dealt by 50%. A nihility character being on the team besides Blade will make the team's ultimate damage dealt increase by 75%. If no other nihility character, so just Blade himself, then it's going to be a damage dealt increase by Blade specifically by 75%. So his amp is 30% defense shred, 50% vulnerability, 50% damage, and 75% ultimate damage for the team, or 75% damage for Blade specifically. He's also an HP drainer, so you are most likely going to need to run him alongside a healer. There is some ways you can run a shielder, but the only way is to, one, have enough investment to where you actually are able to win the battle before going to 1 HP, because when Blade in his zone, which by the way, his first ultimate puts him in a zone where the debuffs and buffs are active, reaching 1 HP will make it to where you can no longer use his skill and also his talent's follow-up attack, which is just a skill but a follow-up attack. Only way to combat that is Permanentary Donning S1. It's not enough to fully sustain it in a long battle, but it is actually quite good. So a healer is mostly going to be advised so you are not ever at 1 HP, or you do the way where you get knocked out of zone, because when you get knocked out of zone, Blade doesn't actually get knocked down, he just exits zone, and he refills his energy because he has a trace that allows him to regenerate his energy to 75% if it is below it. So the way would be getting knocked out of zone and then saving your energy, because you can also overflow energy, to be sure you're able to enter the zone as quick as possible when you are doing that, and then when you go into it, you get some HP back. That way is a lot more difficult, but it is an actual viable option. Just for simplicity's sake though, you are most likely going to be just running a healer. In his zone, he actually gets a different ultimate, which we'll just refer to as the enhanced ultimate, which is a full AoE ultimate that does a big 350% of his max HP to all enemies. It does a lot of damage, especially when it is buffed. Even when it's not buffed, it can do some pretty solid damage. So one of the big selling factors about Mortenax Blade is his amp is really good, and he's also just really good at doing damage, especially if he's also being buffed on the team. Now the next part of this video is reruns to consider. Twitter. So with some info going around, we do roughly know who is going to be running alongside Blade's update, and that includes Yao Guang, Finon, and Cyrene. All characters mostly in high demand, especially depending on your situation. If you're an Elation user and you're missing Yao Guang, you definitely want to pick her up. If you want to dabble into using a lot more Chrysos heirs, then Cyrene is also a must pull, and Finon in general is just a character you really want to pick up if you want him, and also his E2, since he does have the title of E2 merchant. Cyrene is also a very highly sought after E2, especially since it fixes her really only problem with a slow charge up for her ultimate, as it gives her half of it regardless. And then when you pair her on the Chrysos heir teams, you're able to get it within the 0 cycle and allow you to clear a lot more quickly and a lot more comfortably. As I mentioned, Yao Guang is just integral to any Elation teams. If you want to run her on the Silver Wolf team, if you want to run her on an Evanescent team, both of them very much want Yao Guang. She's like the biggest increase you can get, and Yao Guang herself also having good investment with an E1 especially, and also her S1 being really good. And then finally, Finon himself, this is more iffy just because he's not a character you have to fully focus on, but if you do want to get him, you definitely want to focus on his E2 because he does have a significant drop off without his E2. That E2 is very important now. We've gotten to a point where it's still very much possible to get a low cycle clear without the E2, but E2 for the best performance for Finon is very much recommended, as the extra turns do go a long way. On top of that, his E1 also is able to increase the extra speed. By that meaning the extra turn speed in his ultimate, since his ultimate is all the extra turns rather than actual turns, so that's also very important as it increases the inheritance ratio. But when we look past that, we also have other updates like 4.4, 4.5, whatever. This is a lot more iffy to talk about, but I still want to mention it because it is important. Another character that is yet to rerun, that probably will rerun around 4.4, would be Sparksy, who is also pretty important on the Silver Wolf team right now. Not necessarily as wanted as someone like Yao Guang, however still an important character to have because of what she does provide with the skill point consumption, the extra source of DPS, punchline generation, so on and so forth. So that's another character for people that are into the Elation meta. And 4.4 is also seeming to be the climax of the Planet Arcadia arc, meaning we're probably going to get something similar to what we did in the Amphorius time in 3.x, where 4.4 was the second push kind of character, which was Finon himself. In this case, seeming to be the second push of the 4.x update, which is most likely seeming to be Himiko SP. So she is definitely going to be another character that's going to be revolved around and is something you should consider. And a very bit of shaky info is a potential second part of the Fate collab. We're like a day-ish away from drip market, so we might actually get something to confirm that or not. But there's also just many times where we can get something, like we're probably gonna have the live stream in like a week from now, the drip market as I mentioned, or maybe they'll just drop it randomly. It's really iffy to say. This is very iffy, but a second part of the Fate collab potentially is going to be happening, which is going to definitely be a big thing to consider because one, they're collection units and eventually they'll never come back. We don't really have much info to say about that just because Saber and Archer are both here, but just in case, you want to keep that in the back of your mind. And then also right after 4.4 we go into 4.5, we are going to most likely be leaving Planet Arcadia, as this is already officially confirmed. The second part of 4.x was going to be Astropolis with the IPC resort, which is going to seeming to be introducing a lot of character SPs, which is going to be a different part of the meta. It might tie into the earlier ones, but it might be a different one entirely. So that's also something you want to consider in the back of your mind. We're not going to be doing a thing like Amphorius where we have the entire year just be the one arc, and then at the very end we get the god for the Chrysos heirs being Cyrene. In this case, we're actually going to have two different things. The teammates might still function, like we're probably going to have the own separate follow-up team. We're going to have the Silver Wolf team, a Venetia team, maybe even another team. We'd have to see. So future characters and future rerun wise, that's very important to consider because some of these characters are going to be very much wanted on your accounts. If you're into the Elation meta, like you have the DPSs, but you're missing Yao Guang because you just wanted to skip and see if she was actually a part of the team. Same thing applies to Sparksy later on. Then, of course, that's going to be a priority. If you're someone wanting to continue to use your Chrysos heirs, getting Cyrene or investing into Cyrene is very important. And for your Finon, if you want to get him as a DPS, you want to consider E2 right off the bat, or if you already have him and you use them, you want to consider E2 for that as well. And then future characters, Himiko SP, potential Fate collab, and then future characters for Astropolis. Now we finally jump back to Mortenax Blade himself. We want to go over his vertical investment because he actually does have some pretty damn good vertical investment. Firstly, going over his dupes, so we're going to go over E1, E2, and then the actual Lycon because that's kind of the priority. So the E1 is very good because not only is it just more amp, because in his zone now he's able to decrease the enemy's all-type res pen, because now not only is he able to have all those amps in his base kit, but he also now has minus 20% all-type res to enemies in his zone. To top it all off, he's also able to delay his actual actual zone, countdown ender, so when you go into zone, you actually have a countdown. Once you reach it, he exits it. Now for every extra skill you do use, which is the follow-up attack, which is the additional skill from his talent, delays the actual action by 15%, so you're able to stay in it for much longer, potentially netting you 1 to 2 more ultimates, depending on the team you're running him on, and on a team with a bunch of frequency potentially in the future is going to be integral, because then he's just able to stay in it forever pretty much. So E1 is super big value for not only his playstyle but his actual amp at the same time. Then we get onto his E2, which is E2 is also very good now, since it makes it to where now anytime someone on the team does damage via their ultimate, it will now make that ultimate be also considered launching a follow-up attack, and will also be able to increase the team's follow-up damage dealt by 75%. And the best part, it lowers the charge blade needs for his extra skill, which was 9 in his base kit, by 2. So instead of 9 charges to launch that extra skill, it is now 7, which significantly increases his damage output and is just really good. So his E1 and his E2 is really good. E1 mainly for the amp, E2 gives some amp as long as you're doing damage via your ultimate. It also impacts Blade's own ultimate, because at base his ultimate isn't considered a follow-up attack, so any follow-up buffs you have on the team would not actually impact it unless you have E2. This also enables a core to be even better, which is the Blade Veil core, which is just Blade and Asheville. Since now you're able to actually apply Astral's buffs on a character that isn't doing follow-up attacks, because now their ultimate is considered a follow-up attack to get that buff from Asheville. So there's a lot of things you can do with it, which makes it cool. And then again, Blade's own damage amp increase, alongside his own actual damage with the charge decrease. So there's a lot of stuff going into his E1 and his E2, makes them both very high priority, and actually both of them are more valuable than his light cone. And now we actually talk about his light cone, which provides Blade himself a 30% max HP increase, 20 energy at the start of the wave, which would also be triggered at the start of the wearer's turn. To rephrase that, I mean at the start of the wearer's turn, they will generate 20 energy and is triggered 1 time per each wave. Finally, the wearer using a skill attack will inflict a state onto an enemy target. Enemy targets with that state will take 30% increased crit damage, and from the wearer, an additional 30% crit damage will be dealt. So allies can do 30% more crit damage to that enemy target, while Blade himself is able to do 60%. While not terrible, this is actually not his best Lycone when it comes to pure amp as of now. Actually, for pure amp, Cypher Lycone is able to outperform this. This, however, is his best Lycone for his own damage, as it provides him a bunch of HP and has some of the highest base HP in the game with 1376. The extra energy it does provide is good, especially going into ultimate for the first time, or anytime you might need it when you are going into a different wave, which is only 2 to 3 times per battle, so it's not much, which was the biggest downside of this light cone. And the actual amp of crit damage increase is not really that great, especially now with so many crit damage sources. And on his teams, crit damage dealt isn't going to be like the biggest increase. So stuff like Cypher Cone or even Pearls, if you're able to land the effect, further pairing with the defense shred that he has in his kit, makes it better for amp. But yeah, his light cone is not the best for teams at damage, because other cones that have a defense decrease are really good. And also the battle pass light cone is also able to perform it just as good, almost when it comes to amp. It's like a roughly about 6 to 7% worse. But nonetheless, no other light cone comes into comparison when it comes to Blade's own damage. So in a sense, it is still valuable. However, his E1 and E2 are so stacked to the point it's better to go for E1, then E2, then his light cone. So that's something to very much consider when it comes to pulling for him if you are wanting to get him. Finally, this last part before we get into the part of him being worth your Jades, we want to talk about the actual main team he is going to be focused on, at least from what we do know, and that is dedicated to the follow-up team. Mortenax is seeming to create an entirely new follow-up team, right now consisting of Asheville and Blade, who are both considered sub-DPSs on the team. Their damage output is insane together, so it's kind of funny how they're both considered sub-DPS. But yes, the end goal is going to be a team of both Asheville, Blade, and a new main DPS for follow-up teams that we do not know. It is seeming to be Aventurian SP, which would also be a part of the Astropolis update, but we will have to see how long that would take to get him, and also if that ends up being the case. It's not something that's completely concrete. There's stuff saying it will be, there's stuff saying it won't be. So yes, there is still a missing part of that Blade Veil core, which is the main focus for his actual character. He has a lot of other teams, like I mentioned, he's just a good generalist. And there's a lot of teams where he functions really good, such as Akron. But the Asheville team and the follow-up team is actually his main focus. However, both Asheville and Blade, they're not like characters that provide insane frequency for each other. Their frequency is good, Asheville's is good, Blade's is fine. However, they're not the actual missing frequency to get Asheville even more energy or Blade even more charges. Mostly on the Asheville side, Asheville is able to get Blade a lot of charges. On the flip side, it's not really a character giving Astral too much energy. So there is still a missing bridge, assumingly is going to be the main DPS, who's going to have the insane frequency, which bridges it all together. So the main DPS for the follow-up team is still missing, as it's going to be a new one. And also the sustain is going to be missing, because right now the option you use is just Hyacine, which is obviously not going to be the actual consideration for the team. The follow-up healer actually has to be a healer now instead of a shielder, just because of how Blade works, unless they do a thing where they actually have both heal and shields, where it's maybe like able to use shields to convert to healing or something. They're gonna have to figure that out, but yes, there's 2 slots missing, as there's going to be a new main DPS and also a sustain for the team. Who that is, we have no idea. The only assumption right now is Aventurian SP. That's all we got. I personally am hoping that's the case too, because Aventurian is my favorite character, but yes, we will ultimately have to see. So this is also something you have to consider about in the future. Having Astral for Blade's team is important on its own when it comes to actually having him on his best team, but also for the fact you probably are going to have to pull 1 or 2 more teammates. But finally, now at the very end, is this character, Mortenax Blade, worth your stellar Jades? Gonna be honest with you, the answer is just yes. I genuinely think Blade is just a good character to have in your account, similar to, as I mentioned, being able to function as like Tribi did, while not having the same buffs or anything, and also Tribi just having a better E1, Tribi also having her Dance 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 setup. Blade is able to provide technically more amp at a base, but also more damage. He's just a good generalist to have on your account to slot into teams, because of vulnerability is universally good, the defense shred is universally good, damage percent is good for practically any team that isn't Elation or Break. So yeah, the only teams you don't really use him on is Elation or Break. Funny enough, he actually can be used on those teams, mainly Evanescence when it comes to Elation. And Break, he can actually go on there. But yeah, the other teams he would be better on, so you can run him on just ult-based teams, general teams, follow-up teams mainly. He's just a good generalist to have. Like, he's really, really strong overall. And the more vertical investment you get on him having really good vertical investment is going to be super good. And another big thing is, if you're an Acheron user in any way, shape, or form, you literally have to pull this character. It's like you're blood obliged to pull this character. If you play Acheron and you don't pull Blade, you are genuinely doing the most generational throwout I've seen in my life. This character is quite literally Xiaochu and OG Silverwolf E2 after her Nova Flare into one. You give Acheron stacks by enemies attacking you, you give her stacks by anyone attacking enemies. Blade's amp is great for Acheron as well. He also has that damage buff for ultimates, so like actually just plays out perfectly. Well, Acheron isn't the strongest unit anymore, because of course she's an old unit, first anniversary, and we've had 2 anniversaries after that now. There's people that still use her because she's just a really popular character. So if you use her in any way, shape, or form, I don't care if you're a waifu only player or anything or whatever cringe reason you have. Not having Blade is just the biggest generational throw you can do. It's actually insane how bad it would be to not have him. This character actually makes Acheron look like a modern DPS. Even if you don't have the actual main Blade Veil core plus Welt and then Acheron, even if you're just doing like just Blade, Action Advance or like Sparkle, and then last thought either being Welt himself or just like a sustain in general, depends on your investment. There's literally no team that doesn't have Mortenax Blade on it for Acheron. So like, that's a character you just have to get. If you use her in any way, shape, or form, you want to use her in any way, shape, or form, Blade is not negotiable. And then finally, if you also are into the follow-up teams, Blade is also non-negotiable for that. The Blade Veil core is going to be the new modern thing. And the new Phase Shout team, if you still want to put her on the team for some reason, would still be Astral, Blade, Phase Shout, and then Sustain. So for follow-up and Acheron specifically, that's practically just a non-negotiable thing. If you have Astral on your account, you want Blade. If you have Acheron on your account, you want Blade. Those are the 2 main non-negotiable teams. If you don't have them, then you have less value for Blade, but he still is just a good generalist to have. Same things as people said about Tribi when she was coming out. Great generalist, can go on a bunch of teams, is just good to have, especially if your supports are taken up. Especially now where supports that are more niche are in a lot more demand. Blade is just good to have because he is just very strong. So overall, Blade is just a high value character. The literal only way you don't want to use him is if you're specifically using like Silverwolf SP plus Dot plus Break or something. Because while he actually can go on those teams, they are more set without him, especially Silverwolf because she'll just get like a last thought eventually. Break can, but it's not completely optimal. And then Dot, he can, but it's also not completely optimal. And then you'd have to run a lot more sustainless setups, which also can be difficult. Like the dude can literally go on Remembrance. That's how good he is. So yeah, overall Blade is just a high priority character unless you're just specifically using teams that would be much better off not using him, as the ones I mentioned, Dot, Break, so on and so forth. That would be the only case he wouldn't be a worth character. Otherwise, for everyone, he kind of is just that guy. But that finally is it, taking you over this longer sided video, going over general info about Blade, then talking about reruns and future characters to consider, and also what's coming up in the later 4.x, going over his vertical investment, then talking about his actual main team future possibility, and then finally if he himself is worth your stellar Jades. I do hope you found this video helpful. helpful. If you did, drop a like, it would be greatly appreciated. If you're new to the channel or haven't done so already, be sure to subscribe and turn on the bell icon for future videos like this, along with all the tips to our content. And I'll see you later. Peace out.